All right, guys, welcome to History 1301. We're going to talk about in this class the very foundation of our country, what things were like before Europeans ever got here, when they got here, what happened, and over the course of United States history, some of the illustrious things we've done. So in History 1301, this class goes all the way from our very origins all the way to a war that this country fought against itself to answer various different questions in certain aftermaths of major events that happened in our history. So we're going to start today with History 1301 by talking about Chapter 1, the very origins of the United States. How did it get started and where? So the first thing I want to understand, or want you guys to understand about the United States, is what makes us so powerful. There are many different things that happen. The first thing that I want everyone here to understand is that one of the reasons why the United States has such a powerful economy is our physical location in the central part of North America. So, from a longitudinal standpoint, the Americas, North and South America, are very long. They're long. Whereas Eurasia, from Portugal all the way to the Koreas, it's very wide. So you have a wide swath of geography that has similar climate ish. Whereas the Americas, there's more variation because it's more longitudinal. The United States, right here where it currently sits, is arguably the most advantageous location in the entire world. Here's why I say this. First of all, these are the United States right here, these boundaries, these white lines right here, that's the US, or at least the continental US. Obviously, Alaska and Hawaii are out here. Look at the West Coast. From basically Seattle all the way down to San Diego, we have a very broad Pacific coastline. And as such, that gives the United States direct access to the entirety of the Pacific world, whether it's the South Pacific, East Asia, you name it. The Pacific Ocean is exceptionally vast, but the United States has direct access to all of it, all the way down to Mexico, South America, and not just East Asia or the South Pacific. And along the western seaboard rather, San Diego, Los Angeles, you have more of a Mediterranean climate. So it doesn't snow there. It's never iced over. It's a Mediterranean, warm, comfortable climate. And there are some natural seaports that exist all along the Pacific coast that make seafaring all the more possible. So, from that standpoint, it's extremely navigable. Now, let's go to something even greater, the eastern seaboard of the United States, right and throughout here from Maine all the way down to Florida. You have natural harbors like right up in here, the Chesapeake region, where modern day Virginia and Maryland are. That is a naturally occurring harbor that protects a lot of the inland from the harshness of the open ocean. You have a vast coastline here that connects you with the broader North Atlantic and really all the way down, Caribbean and otherwise. And so, from that standpoint, you rarely have frozen over ports. So, maybe up here in places like Maine or elsewhere, maybe it'll freeze over, but that's very temporary. And most places doesn't freeze at all. And the further south you go, the warmer it gets. Let's look into here, the Gulf Coast of the United States, from Brownsville, Texas, all the way basically to Key West. This Gulf area right into out here. Certain phenomenon impact the Gulf. So the first thing is the concept of barrier islands. Where I grew up in South Texas, right here at the tip, where Texas and Mexico come together at the Gulf Coast, South Padre Island is a barrier island that's about a mile wide, but it's a couple hundred miles long. And you have the Gulf on one side, you have the Laguna Madre on the other side, which is a bay, if you will, that separates the island from the mainland. So the barrier island protects the Texas coast from the harshness of the Gulf, and You have barrier islands all and throughout Texas coast, all the way to Florida, all the way up to the Atlantic coast, all the way up to Maine. You have multitudes of barrier islands all in throughout the coast that protect the U.S. mainland from the harshness of the Atlantic Ocean or the Gulf. And you also had the phenomenon known as the Gulf Stream, where warm weather currents basically traverse from the Yucatan Peninsula all throughout the Gulf Coast of the US and up the Atlantic seaboard and up through the North Atlantic up towards modern day Great Britain. So, from that standpoint, the United States, from a seafaring possibility, is exceptionally good because almost all of our coastline is year-round coast, dozens of naturally occurring beautiful harbors that make it ripe for seafaring. And on that instance, you also have warmer weather, the Gulf Stream. And so, yeah, it makes trading with the North Atlantic, the Pacific, all that much more possible. The Gulf Stream provides warmer air and humidity in the Gulf regions on and throughout the southern Atlantic coast of the US. And by doing so, it brings rainfall. Now, speaking of which, you can see this topographical side. The United States is basically split around the 98th meridian longitudinally. That basically bisects the United States into the eastern and western half. The eastern half over here, you notice on this map, it's greener. Okay, there are a couple of reasons for that. First of all, that's a representation maybe of elevation height, but it's also inadvertently rainfall. In the eastern half of the United States, you have the convergence of the Gulf of Mexico or Gulf of America, whichever you prefer. I guess legally Gulf of America now. The Gulf Stream brings warm, moist, humid air that produces ample rainfall essentially in the eastern half of the United States. It's also flatter here, so rainfall is not just more abundant, it's collected differently. And you have this mountain chain basically from New England all the way down to modern day Alabama, right here. That's the Appalachian Mountain Chain, which forms a natural physical barrier between your more mid Atlantic coastal areas with the interior of the United States. So, the western half, this is the Great Basin region right here, the American Southwest, the Pacific Coast. You don't get a lot of naturally occurring rainfall out there. It does rain, but it's much fewer and further between. You just don't have many more naturally occurring water sources due to rainfall out west. You have to go to the coastal areas, Seattle, Portland, places like that, to where you have more of a soggy environment there. And if you've ever been to Portland, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's a very soggy city. But otherwise, though, generally speaking, out west and in states like Nevada, Arizona, Utah, you just don't have a whole lot of naturally occurring rainfall. But that doesn't mean it's not a useful territory. Okay. Other things you might notice, the Mississippi River. The Mississippi River basically runs from modern day Minnesota all the way down into the Gulf near the city of New Orleans where the mouth is. The Mississippi River is basically the drainage system of the central part of North America. It's one of the largest rivers in the world. It's not the largest, but among them, certainly in North America. And there are many different tributaries that drain the western and eastern parts of the continent into the Gulf. Whenever it rains in Kansas, the water will eventually drain into creeks and rivers that make their way into tributaries that make its way eventually to the Mississippi and out into the Gulf. So you have abundant rainfall, especially in the east, that produces a lot of water runoff. And as such, you have an abundance of freshwater tributaries that are large rivers in and of themselves, the Ohio River, the Tennessee River, the Red River, so many different rivers, the Missouri, once you go out west, so many different rivers that in and of themselves could be very substantial rivers, navigable rivers. That's another thing. The rivers in the United States, a whole bunch of them are navigable. The Mississippi River, all the way from Minnesota down to the Gulf. navigable. You can put ships, you can float stuff on it. It's exceptionally good. And so that's really different. We have a lot of fresh water in the United States because of the rainfall, naturally occurring rivers that are navigable, which could move goods and services. Additionally, you have the Great Lakes right up here, beginning with Lake Superior, Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, Lake Erie, and Lake Ontario. These are naturally occurring freshwater lakes that are connected to another broader river system, the St. Lawrence River, right into out here, that basically drains out into the northern Atlantic in the modern day provinces of Ontario and Quebec. And so you have a very substantial river system up there that provides fresh water, but also direct access to the Atlantic Ocean. So whether it's the Mississippi and you have access to the Gulf, therefore access to the Caribbean and the Atlantic, or the St. Lawrence River, direct access to the North Atlantic, you have an abundance of waterways, navigable pathways, naturally occurring harbors, naturally occurring rain in the eastern half of the continent, producing very large drainage systems that are navigable, great lakes that produce lake effect snow, all kinds of different things that produce quite a bit of fresh water. And so the United States, from a geographic standpoint, we got a lot of really positive stuff going for us. Not only that, this central part of the country, right and throughout here, modern day Nebraska, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, the Dakotas, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Ohio. That's the upper Midwest and the Midwest in general. That's America's breadbasket. The land there is exceptionally fertile, and we have an abundance of fresh water that can be used for irrigation. So the United States isn't just geographically advantageous because of our physical location with seafaring and rivers, it's also quite fertile in a whole swath of our country. In other words, if there was ever a famine across the world, United States, we'd be fine. We'd be okay. We can feed ourselves. And if you have eaten anything recently, you can thank farmers that live out in the Midwest as a result of it. Corn, wheat, all kinds of different things growing out there. And we'll talk about how they are grown. But otherwise, though, the United States, where we sit, is exceptionally advantageous. There aren't really any other places across the world that benefit quite the same way that we do from our geographic location. Not only that, but most of the country, up in the Dakotas and Minnesota and Wisconsin, it gets frozen a lot during the wintertime. Here in Texas, we have our freeze this year. You would almost convince people that, yeah, it's never going to get warm again. Just wait until the summer. You'll be fine. But otherwise, though, you have year-round growing seasons, abundance of rainfall, naturally occurring mountain chains that affect weather patterns out west, seafaring opportunities out west with the Pacific, the Gulf, the Atlantic, naturally occurring harbors and barrier islands that make our geographic location just exceptionally beautiful. Temperate weather, especially the further south you go. Um, Great Lakes, fresh water, fertile soil. It's almost as if there was ever an entity that can harness all of these things and put it to economic use, any entity that would settle in this region of the world would be predestined to be a major economic powerhouse. And that's exactly what happened with the United States. So, how did it all start? So, that's our topography. In the Americas, North and South America, we use the term Native American here in the US to describe the peoples that were here, Native Americans, formerly known as Indians. We'll talk about how that happened. But otherwise, though, we refer to them as North Americans. And yet there really aren't any people who are technically native to the Americas. You see, in Canada, they refer to Native Americans as First Peoples, as in they were the first peoples to cross over a land bridge and inhabit the areas that are known today as the country of Canada, the United States, and down into the Americas. That's technically correct. They're the first peoples here because they're not technically native. Nobody's technically native to the Americas. But for lack of a better term, we use Native American here in the United States. So if nobody's originally from here, where'd they come from and how'd they get here? That's a great question. So up here near modern day Alaska, 10,000 years ago during the Ice Age, there used to be a bridge across to modern day Siberia in northeastern Russia that basically formed a bridge where peoples from the central part of Asia and elsewhere could migrate across into modern day Alaska and down into Canada, the modern day US, and elsewhere in the Americas. That happened and occurred about 10,000 years ago. And over thousands of years, these peoples that migrated from Asia made their way into North America all the way down to the bottom tip of South America and every place in between. You have peoples who stayed in the colder climates in the northern Arctic regions. You have those who settled in the Great Lakes region, those who settled in the American Southwest, where it's more desert condition. Elsewhere and otherwise, you have peoples who settled in the Central Valley of Mexico. They'd make their way to the Caribbean islands, down into through the Darien Gap, all the way into South America. Major civilizations. So in Peru, for example, down here in this region of South America, you have the Inca people who settled in the Andes Mountains, and they formed the Inca civilization, which is one of the great civilizations in world history that could rival anything you would see in Mesopotamia, Asia, Europe, Africa, you name it. The Incas were crucial. They settled in modern day Peru. There were other great peoples who settled in the Central Valley of Mexico right here, near modern day Mexico City. The Olmec civilization was one of the oldest to develop in that region of North America. Later on, here in the Yucatan Peninsula and into modern day Guatemala and places like that, Belize, you have the Mayan civilization, another major civilization that could rival anything you would see in Egypt or Mesopotamia. As a matter of fact, the Mayans were so advanced that they built pyramids, oddly similar to the ones built in Egypt, by the way, that calculate sun movement in the sundial. And they came up with the concept of the number zero and so much different uh, opportunity for civilization growth. And how'd they make it happen? In the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, right here, there's no naturally existing above land rivers. A lot of the fresh water is actually underground in cenotes, in caves. But the standpoint of there being jungle territory over here, you're going to have a civilization that has abundant rainfall, and they just might be able to grow stuff. The Aztecs would be the very largest right here civilization that would exist in modern day Central Valley of Mexico that would develop into a bustling society. So the Aztecs were a major civilization. One of the things that made the Aztecs such a powerful entity was that they were sedentary. What do I mean by that? In other words, they didn't have to go chasing their food. So, with the advent of agricultural opportunity, you have various different regions, like right here in the Central Valley of Mexico, this red area, the Mayans here in this pinkish area, and this purple area, the Incas in South America. Major foodstuffs were developed here in the Americas that feed the world. In the Central Valley of Mexico, near modern day Mexico City, and that region is where three major foodstuffs were developed: corn, beans, and squash. Okay. And in South America, near modern day Peru, the potato was developed. Other foodstuffs, such as tomatoes, were also developed there, peppers like jalapenos and otherwise. So many different foodstuffs that you and I consume on a daily basis, or if not regular basis, that would feed millions of people across the world were developed in these regions. So, corn, beans, and squash, potato. Yeah. Uh, One of the reasons why Mexican food has so much similarity is that's where corn was originally developed in the Central Valley. So corn tortillas, you have so many different, you have so much corn basis in the Mexican diet, and it only makes sense. That's where it all originated. The potato, which would feed millions of starving Europeans later on, we'll talk about that later on, that was developed in Peru, near modern day Peru. The tomatoes, Italians love pasta sauce. Well, pasta sauce via the tomato, that's an American born foodstuff. Pasta was actually developed in East Asia. Okay. So they have East Asia and the Americas to thank for a large part of their cuisine. Ireland, a lot of the steak and potato type diet, well, the potato comes from the Americas. So thankful for that. That's how it happens. So corn, beans, and squash from the Central Valley of Mexico and the potato from Peru are major foodstuffs developed in the Americas that will eventually feed people. But going back to these major civilizations, settling in the Americas, you can have major civilizations that exist in areas where people can congregate and not have to leave. So, for example, the Aztecs, when they harnessed the ability to grow corn, and in the Central Valley of Mexico, they have a very temperate climate. It's like spring every day. You don't have to leave. You can stay in the same area. And as such, you can develop communities, cities, if you will, where you can build schools and other aspects of semi government. There's all kinds of things that you can do. Technology, libraries, neighbor, civilization, culture. And as such, you're not having to go chase all your food everywhere. You're growing it out in the fields. So, from that standpoint, the Central Valley of Mexico became a major center population because of their ability to stay in the same place. And you develop civilization as a result. The Mayans over here in the Yucatan Peninsula were major civilization that existed before the Aztecs. Problem for the Mayans was that they exhausted a lot of their resources. A lot of people have this belief that the Americas, before European contact, especially before industrialization, were these pristine areas. And maybe they were more so than today. Sure, I'll acknowledge that for sure. That being said, though, a lot of these civilizations, such as the Mayans, basically starved themselves out of existence because they did not know how to harness and manage and conserve resources. A lot of slash and burn techniques out there in the Yucatan Peninsula. You exhaust water sources, you exhaust the soil, which may not have been the most fertile in the first place. Now you're going to clear it from all the trees and you're going to exhaust some of your underground water sources. You're going to disperse your population and lose your civilization as a result. So, from that standpoint, that's one of the reasons why the Mayan civilization eventually ceased to exist. There are remnants of Mayan civilization that exist to this day, just not in organized form. If you ever go to Cancun or Playa del Carmen, places like that, you'll see remnants of Mayan civilization, especially if you go to any of the ruins at Tulum, Chichen Itza. A lot of the people there speak a Mayan dialect along with Spanish. And so these are things that you will often see down there as well. But otherwise, they give rise to the major foodstuffs, corn, beans, and squash in Mexico, and the potato in Peru, basically. This is the Atlantic world as it existed around the year 1300. And so you see natives and native tribes that existed, and we'll talk about those that are specific to the United States, that really had no idea what was going on across the world and vice versa. Europeans were suffering a whole bunch of other things. Africans, a number of other major civilizations that existed around here, modern day Mali, north of modern day Nigeria, Niger, places around there, some very, very uh, terrific African civilizations that existed around that time. And they had no idea of stuff that was going on in the Americas. Europeans coming out of the Middle Ages, we'll talk about some of their fervor, especially major disease that affected them and added extra emphasis to find resources. Europeans at the time believed largely that the world was flat. And so if you sailed out west from Portugal or Spain or someplace like that, you will eventually fall off the earth. Now, newsflash, the world is not flat. The earth is a globe, it's spherical. And so you're not going to fall off the earth. That being said, most believe that if you did sail across, you're going to make your way all the way to Asia. They had no idea that this whole world existed, North and South America. And so Europeans had a lot of different misbeliefs around what existed around there at the time. They had no idea that North or South America existed. And that was around this time that you did have Viking explorers from Scandinavia that did chart places around northern Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, places like along those lines, but there was never any broad Viking settlement. And eventually it was almost kind of forgotten. So, yeah, the Vikings kind of explored and, if you will, discovered North America, but not to any substantial event. That wouldn't happen until almost 1500. Newsflash. Okay. Otherwise, though, let's talk about in North America and what is today the United States itself. You have different regions of North America that have different climates, different access to water, that have access to the ocean or lack thereof, that have plains, that have various different wildlife, flora and fauna. You have different cultures and languages that would be interconnected. So you have various Nahuatl languages that existed in the Central Valley of Mexico that are not dissimilar from some of the ones that exist in the American Southwest. Okay, that's pretty great. And so, because of it, that's going to impact Native American society all throughout the region that would become the United States of America. Native Americans that existed in the eastern half of the United States, the Cahokian type peoples, those are the ones that would build mounds and oftentimes have irrigation channels and whatnot to kind of settle in some areas. They would have different cultures and civilizations. One of the most prominent is the Iroquois Nation, set up of 5 major tribes, modern day New York, all the way through down to Ohio, places like that. That's where the Iroquois largely settled. And then you have the plains. Ah, the plains. Nebraska, Kansas, the Dakotas, all the way down into Texas, where maybe there's not as much of an abundance of water. There's a whole lot of buffalo there. And so, from that standpoint, maybe you build an entire society centered around the idea of being nomadic. Wherever the buffalo go, you go. And when you hunt buffalo, you utilize every single aspect. The buffalo hide can be used for warm blankets, it can be used as a temporary shelter for your teepee. That's what it's called. You can eat, obviously, the meat. You can dry it out and make basically jerky, if you will. You can use the bones to have chisel ornaments or anything else like that. You can also maybe have various different rituals in and around the blood or the eyeballs or the tongue or anything else like that. Basically, wherever the buffalo go, you go. So it is exceptionally difficult maybe to settle. So from that standpoint, the Plains Indians develop a different culture as a result. In the American Southwest, near modern day Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, you have more of your Pueblo peoples. That's the Valley of the Sun over there. They don't get a whole lot of rainfall. It's exceptionally dry, it's exceptionally hot. So, whatever waterways you do have access to, maybe you build primitive canals that can help irrigate whatever lands you have available. And if you've ever been in modern day Phoenix, or places like Tempe or any place around that area of Arizona, you might be driving along the street and all of a sudden you'll see a canal kind of going this way. That canal might have existed for hundreds of years. Just in modern times, maybe they added tracks to it to where you can harness it with modern technology a little bit differently, especially with the advent of concrete. But otherwise, though, you're going to harness water in whichever way you get it. And in kind of necessary shading of the sun, maybe you're going to build not just mounds, maybe you're going to build existences in the side of a mountain. You're going to use adobe, kind of a stucco form, to maybe borrow from the soil and build mounds and mud huts the way that you see in modern day New Mexico and places like that, Santa Fe, that sort of architecture. And the Pueblo peoples would rely upon irrigation from whichever waterways did exist, building canals to maybe eke out a subsistence. And then you go to the Pacific Northwest, modern day Washington State, Oregon, around Seattle, Portland, those areas. You get more rainfall. It's a lot mistier around there. It's always kind of soggy. And as such, you're going to have some very large rivers that exist out there, the Columbia River, the Snake River. You're going to get rainfall. You have access to the ocean. So a lot of Native Americans that existed in the modern Pacific Northwest, they ate a lot of fish, sturgeon, salmon, all kinds of stuff like that. And there's also some very big game that exists out there too. Modern day elk, moose, deer. I had a conversation with a guy from Washington one time. He told me he liked to go hunting. And he said that one time he went hunting in Texas. And he said, man, I was disappointed when I got to Texas because those white deer deer you have there in Texas, they're like puppies with antlers. Like, yeah, that's kind of right compared to some of the wildlife that exists in the Pacific Northwest. Sturgeon that could be 20 feet long, can feed a whole village. Large aspects of salmon and salmon runs and things like that out in the ocean. So the Pacific, folks in the Northwest Pacific, they really liked fishing in the ocean and big game. And so you can see in North America, you have differentiation between the different types of Native Americans that existed because of various different resources. So water, the ocean, large animals, rainfall, that's going to impact things. So out here, out east, you have more of your Cahokia peoples, plains out here chasing buffalo. In the American Southwest, irrigation canals. And in the Pacific Northwest, you've got large fish and large game to sustain your populations. So yeah, here's a depiction of cave dwellings in the American Southwest, your Pueblo peoples. These may be some of their orientation designs of their villages. And then these are European portrayals of some of the Native Americans when they first encountered themselves. This one here on the left kind of makes me laugh a little bit. I know he's rowing the boat over here, but it almost looks like a rake, like he's raking the water. And these fish are meant to be like, I guess, like underwater, but they look like they're above water. They're flying. These guys are spearing them, trying to stab them. It looks like they sprang a leak in this picture right there. It's kind of interesting how that works like that. But otherwise, though, you also, in other civilizations across the world, you have major civilizations in West Africa. A lot of people don't remember this. So modern day Mali, Niger, or not Kenya, Nigeria, and places like that. You had some major African civilizations. And they had connections to Europe, but they were still mostly unknown by Europeans at the time. Hold that thought because that's going to change. But otherwise, you will definitely need to know that there are major African civilizations that also existed simultaneously that impact society. So, guys, that's the first half of chapter 1. We will finish that up here shortly and we will go from there. Otherwise, though, be on the lookout for part 2 of chapter 1.